Jeff Rath. Let's get you in here. Welcome to the show, my man.
Hey, Clyde. Thanks for having me on again.
Absolutely. It was such a riot talking to you last time because we did a short segment where we just talked briefly about your the lawsuit that you've brought forward with your what was illegal firm. Sorry, I'm just loss of words here.
Oh, Rath. Rath and Company. Yeah.
That's right. And then I got to speak with you more afterwards, and you're just such an interesting fella that I wanted to bring you on the show because it's great to hear a lot of the stuff that you're saying. You're a prolific writer on Substack, and you've got amazing things going for you. Now, I just want to start first and foremost for the audience. Can you explain a bit more about the lawsuit that you brought in Alberta?
Sure. We have the honor of representing Rebecca Ingram and Christopher Scott as our representative plaintiffs who are fronting a class action lawsuit against the government of Alberta arising out of Dina Hinshaw and Jason Kenney issuing over 113 illegal public health orders throughout the pandemic. So we ran a case called the Ingram case in the Court of King's Bench on behalf of Rebecca Ingram, who was a gym owner that had her gym illegally shut down by the Alberta government, during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And one of the primary argument that we were making was that all of the orders that were issued under the Public Health Act were ultra vires the Public Health Act because A, they went too far, and B, you had this bizarre circumstance going on where Jason Kenney, in effect, was using Dina Hinshaw as a beard to issue orders that properly should have been issued under the Alberta Emergencies Act and not the Public Health Act. I mean, one of the things that we were saying is that, that the Public Health Act wasn't set up to have, a doctor who has no understanding of the provincial economy, economics, the degree to which an entire provincial economy can be destroyed. Shutting down entire segments of the economy on the basis of some crackpot theory that by shutting down the businesses of healthy people and telling healthy people that they can't go to certain businesses, that somehow or other you're going to prevent COVID from getting into nursing homes, right?
Right.
So, that was the approach that we took from the outset. And much to everybody's surprise, we ended up getting an order from the Court of King's Bench, in effect agreeing with us that all of the orders issued by Dina Hinshaw were in fact outside of the scope of the Public Health Act, or ultra vires the Public Health Act. Mm-hmm. So, or patently illegal, as I would like to, as I usually say. So the reason that was so important was there's actually a section of the Public Health Act that says that you can't sue anybody. It's section 66.1 for anything done under the Public Health Act, which would be a real problem with regard to a lawsuit. But because we got this court order saying that everything was ultra vires or outside of the scope of the Public Health Act, section 66.1 doesn't apply. So now we have an order from the court saying that everything that Dina Hinshaw and Jason Kenney did was unlawful, right? And they have no protection under the Public Health Act. And of course, we're moving forward now on behalf of businesses that have suffered massive economic harm. I mean, Rebecca, didn't go bankrupt, but she was forced to sell her gym and all of her equipment at a massive loss to keep from, being forced into bankruptcy. Chris Scott, is literally, who opened his business in the face of these idiotic orders on the basis of Chris's deep-seated belief that the orders were illegal. Chris was hauled off in handcuffs and thrown in jail, and his business was chained shut. And he was, his business was basically thrown in jail. All because he had the temerity to stand up to the government and say, I don't believe that what you're doing is lawful, and I'm going to continue to, as a free Albertan, I'm going to continue to operate my business and feed my family, with the proceeds of my labor, which is my right to do as a citizen. And of course, the fascist Kenney government, decided that it was appropriate to lock people like Chris up. I mean, hell, they put churches in jail, right?
Yeah.
They put fences around churches. They locked up churches. They locked up pastors. All because, as far as the government was concerned, healthy Christians couldn't congregate together in Holy Sacrament and worship their God the way they wanted to, because Dina Hinshaw and Divinity School dropout Jason Kenney said that they couldn't. I mean, it was one of the most shocking, periods of my life, that I've ever experienced. I mean, I'm a, this sounds a bit strange, but I'm a 6'4" white male, so I've never really ever experienced discrimination before in my I found, and people gave Danielle Smith a hard time about saying how, the unvaccinated, became the most discriminated group of people that she'd seen in her lifetime. As a 6'4" white male, I wasn't allowed to go to restaurants. I couldn't go to hockey games. I couldn't get on a plane because our idiotic prime minister, was saying that he didn't want the filthy unvaccinated sitting next to his children. And keep in mind, when I say idiotic, I'm not just saying that as a pejorative. Those orders were patently ridiculous. Health Canada itself issued guidance in July of 2021 saying that there was growing evidence that the vaccines weren't stopping the spread, and that if you were vaccinated, you could get COVID just as easily as somebody who was unvaccinated. There was a massive study that was done by University of California, Davis in July of 2021. And keep in mind, I was following all this stuff in real time because I was representing a bunch of doctors. If you imagine doctors and anesthetists and emergency room physicians, allegedly in the middle of a public health crisis, being told that they couldn't go to work and help sick people because they were not convinced that these vaccines were anything other than, an experiment that they didn't want to take part in for, big reasons pertaining to medical ethics. So, I mean, I was following all this stuff, in real time, through the pandemic and litigating this stuff in real time, as we were going through it. So I could watch, the foolishness unfold, in real time on an ongoing basis. So, when Trudeau was bringing in those mandates and telling people that they couldn't fly and they had to be locked up in airport hotels, for days if they weren't vaccinated and all those types of things, there was no scientific justification for it. And in fact, the science went the completely opposite way, that the government of Canada, in effect, conspired to keep that information secret. Right.
So my question, my question at this point though is, we've had this ruling in Alberta. Now, what does this legally mean for the rest of Canada? Because I believe there's lawsuits taking place in different provinces. Is there anything that's transferable, like precedent or anything like that?
Yeah, well, sure. If I were a lawyer in another province, I mean, I'd be digging into how the orders were made in those other provinces and look at the statute that they were promulgated under. The problem is that I suspect that, like in Ontario, as an example, I think they actually used some version of the Ontario Emergencies Act. So they actually declared a province-wide emergency. And of course, Jason Kenney, being the feckless coward that he was, didn't want to take the notes.
You got away with words, though. I love it. It's funny.
I don't know what else to say. Didn't want to declare an emergency in Alberta, and instead, he hid behind the skirts and bangs of Dina Hinshaw, saying, "Oh no, this isn't us, and we're just following medical advice. We're following the science. We're doing what the good doctor is telling us," right? And of course, what we discovered in the course of the round one of the Ingram litigation was that they weren't following the science. In effect, and I used to refer to, and the judge got quite angry with me when I would refer to the government this way, but I would refer to Jason Kenney and his cronies as the cocktail cabinet, because if you could remember, while the rest of us were all locked down, they were all sitting on the terrace of the Sky Palace having drinks together and having a big yuck while the rest of us were locked up in our homes.
That was a trend across the world as well. There was politicians that were just...
all those World Economic Forum, people, it's do as I say, not as I do, right? Like, according to Theresa Tam, heteronormativity causes climate change, but they'll all hop in. I swear to God, the government can't document, right? Heteronormativity, ableism, capitalism all cause climate change. Got to stop those things out, right? Yeah. So, but they'll all get into their private jets and fly to Davos, right?
Right.
And well, the rest of us are locked up in our homes, which is a good thing. So if we're locked up in our homes, it's the ultimate extension of their 15-minute city dream, right? Mm-hmm. We go from a 15-minute city to a 30-second city, because we're not allowed out of our houses. And isn't that wonderful? Because we're not burning, anything carbon, that spews carbon in order to go anywhere and generate any economic activity. Which again, if we read what Theresa Tam is saying about capitalism causing climate change, well, we don't want to have any capital, we don't want to have any economic activity. We got to shut it all down, and for the sake of this so-called climate emergency that they claim that we're living in.
Yeah, well, that's the joke, right? Why does China not have to do anything about climate change? It's because they already have a communist government. That's the approach that they're trying to bring us down. I mean, they don't. It's funny because we're jumping all over the place because I was going to get into this later, but since you brought it up, Guilbeault going on the House of Parliament floor and saying that he's a proud socialist, like they're not even shy about it anymore. They're just going right for the jugular on the Canadian economy and trying to shut us down, deindustrialize the country in order to bring about a communist utopia where we all ride bicycles and it doesn't like get cold at night and we don't have to eat food.
Well, but if I were you, I'd hang on a second on the don't get cold at night thing, because I think Guilbeault and Bill Gates are planning on to bring on the next ice age. No, seriously, I was shocked to read, this week, articles where people are seriously saying that there's some group of scientists, and we'll put that in quotes again because we got to follow the science, who think it's a wonderful idea to load, millions of airplanes up with calcium carbonate dust, right? Fly into the upper atmosphere and disperse calcium carbonate dust all over the upper atmosphere to reflect sunlight back into outer space.
It's
comical. In effect, create this calcium carbonate pollution umbrella over the entire planet to keep the sun from warming the planet too much, because we're all getting too much sunlight apparently. So, and Guilbeault thinks, I was reading today, Guilbeault thinks that this is a wonderful idea. And all of the money that he's going to save, I guess, ostensibly for not building any more roads, right? So we're not going to build any more roads, but we can take all the money that we've saved from building roads to spewing calcium carbonate pollution into the atmosphere to block out the sun, so that we're going to fight climate change. I mean, it's insane, right?
This is how far they don't think. Because then I don't know if anybody's brought this up to them, because they're surrounded by a bunch of yes men, but their plan is block out the sun, and then you turn around and you say, but you just got us on solar energy. What are you doing?
Well, no, it's all of that, right? And you don't understand. And I'll tell you, I'm almost 60 years old. I'm 59 years old. I have lived in Western Canada my entire life. Okay, right. So if you ever need control of the thermostat for Western Canada, I'd turn that sucker up 5 degrees. Right? No, global warming, general warming trend in the environment and the climate is good for Canada. There was a fantastic article written by the Financial Post, 6 or 7 years ago, that talked about, how Canada's GDP would increase by about 10%. We'd have so much more arable land. If the overall global temperatures increase by, by 3 degrees, our forests would produce more wood. Our resources would be more easily extracted because we wouldn't have the large winter freeze that we're dealing with. And then for all the climate change weirdos that think that burning, natural gas to keep warm is such a bad thing. Well, we wouldn't need to burn, as much natural gas to keep warm either, if the temperatures went up. So I don't understand what the problem is.
Well, people forget that we're a tropical species, human beings, and we actually fare quite well when it's warm.
No, for sure. And, and the other thing is too, I mean, the government and all the climate change people have done a really, really good job of suppressing the information. But, if you look back at global average temperatures, over an appropriate period of time, and you can actually get into the data by reading all the ice core data that's coming out of Greenland and the rest of it, right? Yeah. They have really good long historical, data going back, 20, 30, 40,000 years that you can get from these ice cores. And what it shows is that basically up until the time of Julius Caesar, the overall temperature going back 20 or 30,000 years was about 3 degrees higher than it currently is now. And then for some unknown reason, and people don't know what the precipitating cause was, the temperatures around the time of Julius Caesar plummeted 3 degrees, and they've been bouncing along the bottom ever since, and that's where we are right now.
Right.
So we live in this weird world where every time the temperatures that are bouncing along the bottom that they've been bouncing along for the last 2,000 years bump up even just a little bit back to the median line that's 3 degrees warmer where they were 2,000 years ago and had been for thousands of years previous to that. Everybody freaks out, screams that the sky is falling. We're all going to die from that this is an existential threat. It's all man-made carbon, blah blah blah, right? And of course, the planet itself is adjusting. Like if you talk to people, there was real concern from climate scientists that if you go back to the to the mid 19th century, that the planet was on the verge of carbon starvation.
Yes.
Because there wasn't enough carbon for plants, and there was a big issue with human agriculture and the rest of it. And thank God for the Industrial Revolution, and then we started burning coal, and we started increasing the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. And surprise, surprise, plant growth started taking off again. And what all these people, Guilbeault included, refused to acknowledge is that my source for this is NASA. Actual rocket scientists, right? But if you go back, if you look at NASA and you look at the data from some of their Earth, satellites and all the rest of it, everybody will acknowledge that over the last 40 years, thanks to this increase in carbon that everybady's so afraid of, the vegetative mass of the planet has increased by a good 20%. Mm-hmm. So this extra carbon making, like a square meter of grass, instead of having, I'm just making the numbers up now, but instead of having 100,000 blades, we'll have 140,000 blades, and we'll absorb that and sequester that much more carbon. We'll grow more trees, the trees will have more leaves, all of those types of things. And when carbon levels get higher, photosynthesis becomes, more active, and vegetation grows better and absorbs more carbon. So the planet is regulating itself. We don't need to be kicking the shit out of kicking the shit out of poor working people and, doubling and tripling their home heating bills, right? To stop, to address CO2. The planet's regulating itself, and Guilbeault and Trudeau don't want to acknowledge that because they hate working people. They don't want them to have cars. They don't want them to have the liberty that I enjoyed growing up, where every 16-year-old kid, his first dream was to go out and buy, a muscle car or whatever, so he could get away from his parents and do whatever he wanted. No. We don't want anybody driving anymore, especially anybody that's working class. We want them living in 15-minute city ghettos where, in effect, they now become cogs or serfs in this new system of, I call it neo-feudalism, that they're setting up, with all these 15-minute city fiefdoms where the barons are now the big multinational corporations like Walmart and, Costco and other companies that, have half of their shares owned by the Chinese Communist Party, right?
This is why I find it really interesting chatting with you, because you bounce around a lot. It's really hard for me to pinpoint a thing. So there's a few points that I wanted to make in that. So
I'm sorry. It's getting late at night, and I think my ADD is in overdrive.
Okay. So
if you want to ask me some straight questions, I'll try to give you some.
Well, I just wanted to add some points to what you were saying. Now, recently I was put on a hit list by some group that looks for people who are climate deniers. This was the thing that was thrown in my direction. So I always like to look at argumentation, and I'll look at other points of view, say maybe my point of view isn't accurate, and this is how you test your logic all the time. Always test what you believe and look at other information. There are other people out there that believe in this anthropomorphic global warming theory, but they don't follow on the lines of like this weird nouveau religion like Guilbeault has been espousing. People like Bjorn Lornberg writing books talking about how there is a climate, climate is changing, and they believe that it is due to CO2 and it's anthropomorphic, but they say that we can totally adapt to it. It's not beyond the pale. It's not really an emergency. And the solutions aren't making everybody poor. The solutions are actually driving economic value, like economic wealth, use modern technologies to get ourselves out of this this mess, if this mess is even a mess in the first place. You know what I mean?
But again, like, let's look at it. I look at it from the standpoint of as being a Canadian or being an Albertan, right? And the foolishness that I see is the fact that China and India are the largest CO2 emitters on the planet.
That's right.
Combined, and putting it together, every year they increase their carbon output by 10% of the total global output. Okay, so just think about that for a second, right? And if you buy for a second that Canada's total output is 2%, which I don't, right? Because I think Canada is actually a massive carbon sink. And I've read lots of things that say that Canada's carbon negative probably 15 times over, and everybody else in the world should be sending us checks in the billions of dollars for carbon credits, right? But that's the advantage side, right?
Yeah, and actually, to add to that, we would actually sequester more carbon if we increased our logging industry. If we cut down more trees and planted more trees, we would actually be even more of a carbon soak. It's amazing how.
Well, because I've done that research, and it's fascinating. Because I'm actually, when I'm not practicing law, I'm a rancher and I raise quarter horses, and I live out in the foothills, and I manage a couple 100 acres of pasture land or grass, right?
Right.
So one day I was curious to what compared to forested lands, how much carbon my 200 acres of grassland absorbed and sequestered versus as compared to 200 acres of trees. Well, lo and behold, apparently 1 square meter of grass absorbs far more carbon than a square meter of trees, right? Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing was, when I did the calculation and ran all the math on it, my 200 acres of grass apparently creates enough oxygen and sequesters and absorbs enough carbon for 2,400 people. I mean, that's just me. Right?
Well, that's funny, because they keep saying that cows are contributing to climate change, but if that's the case, that's what they eat, and it's part of the natural cycle. Then they would be just added into the carbon cycle.
Well, and on top of it, and exactly, and when you look at normal grazing practices, so if you look at grassland cattle, and of course I have a lot of buddies that are ranchers. We've done, again, all of us have went to high school in Alberta, so we can do basic math, right? So you do the basic math, and when you look at how many head of cattle you're allowed to carry per acre, across ranch lands, right? The simple fact of the matter is that the grass that the cows are eating absorb far more carbon than the cows are producing, right? Mm-hmm. So there isn't a problem with cattle, other than we have that investment club in Davos that gets together every year, that have figured out that a bunch of them want to make billions of dollars or siphon off billions of dollars in government subsidies by building bug factories. And in order to force people to eat bug paste and to get bug paste into the food chain, we've got to start outlawing cattle. I mean, it's all part and parcel of that whole ridiculous process that these idiots have us, having us buy into under the guise of climate change emergency.
That's amazing. Like,
right?
is that really a thing?
Right?
So I have looked into it a little bit, and there's that manufacturer facility in London, Ontario, that makes crickets for human consumption. Is this a real thing? They want to actually push bug eating? Couldn't that make people get sick?
Well, but again, think about what it is. The whole idea behind bug protein is, once they legalized it for human consumption, then it's not very far to getting it into processed meats, processed foods, whatever. So these people that are planning all of this stuff. It's kind of like that old Charlton Heston movie, Soylent Green. Right?
Yeah. It's people. It's people.
Instead of eating humans, they're just going to feed us mealworms, right? And they're going to grind them up, and put them in the Beyond Meat burger, right? The Beyond Meat burger.
Yeah, Beyond. That's right.
Right? Because you know, I mean, but I mean, I imagine the reason they're doing it is that some bright boy somewhere has figured out that it's a lot cheaper and easier to grow, you know, to grow mealworms than it is to grow pea protein, as an example, right? So you know, I mean, that's what we're talking about. It's all multi-billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar schemes of all of these people that get together in Davos every year to go, okay, let's get together in a little back room here and figuring out, okay, what's the next multi-billion-dollar subsidy that we can suck out of idiots like Justin Trudeau to line our pockets with, right? In the name of climate change, right?
Well, this is a good segue to like advocate for people to eat whole foods. You know, like eat foods. I don't mean Whole Foods, the company. I mean Whole Foods. Like, buy your food from farmers markets. Don't buy processed stuff. If you want to process food, you can make your own sausage. You can make your own all kinds of stuff. Like, actually get into making your own things. At home here, my wife makes sourdough bread. We make our own bacon. We make a whole plethora of things that's really easy to do. It's not like it takes a ton of time out of your day. You can pickle stuff, and you can all this probiotic stuff that's really actually good for your guts. That, you know, don't leave it up to these people, because they'll put bugs in your stuff, you know, at the end of the day.
Oh no, you know, and all that processed food, I mean, you know, contributes massively to obesity and, you know, all of those things, right? I mean, you know, it's really interesting if you go back and if you look at street scenes from, you know, New York City in the 1920s and 1930s. I mean, you didn't see a fat person, you know, because everybody was eating, you know, wholesome, healthy, you know, like you say, whole foods. I mean, they ate actual chicken, they ate actual beef, they ate actual lamb, they ate actual pork, you know, and vegetables and, you know, and whatever, as opposed to this, you know, ground up stuff that they put into the McNugget or, you know, whatever other form of
whatever the stuff ends up being. Yeah. Mystery meat.
Yeah. Yeah. Pre-chewed, pre-ground, pre-everything food that they, you know, food, I'll put that in quotes, that they feed us, right?
It's awful. It's awful.
No, I mean, but I, you know, and I have to say, I'm not some holier than thou kind of guy. I've never been, and that was I have to say, that was my big struggle with the vaccines, was I've never been a my body is my temple kind of guy. I mean,
right.
I'm currently told by my doctor that I need to lose another 30 pounds. So I've yet to be able to go to McDonald's and eat a McRib as much as I want.
I forgot that that's a thing right now. Yeah, Marty told me about that.
McRib, right? But they're obviously, I mean, it's a processed meat patty, and you know, how much money will big business, you know, be able to save if they can make half of the processed meat out of mealworms as opposed to pork?
That's awful. I can't get on board with that ever. No, count me out. No thanks.
Right. Again, it's just one of these stupid schemes. Like, have you heard about that the CO2 vacuums that they're going to build in the States? So somebody who obviously bought something, perhaps diamonds that got thrown in the garbage, or bought something for the Biden family, has been given billions of dollars, right? Or a corporation in the States is being given billions of dollars by the federal government in the U.S. to build giant CO2 vacuum plants. So it's this giant plant, cost $1 billion to build, that it just has a big pipe and sucks air into it, takes the CO2 out of the air, does something with the CO2 and throws oxygen out the other end or whatever, right? But again, like, think about this, how stupid this whole thing is, right? Like, how much national wealth would it take to build enough of these stupid things to actually impact CO2 at all? Again, given that China and India increase their output by 10% of the global total every year. It's just, again, it's another one of these get-rich-quick schemes where the only vacuuming that's going on is the vacuuming of the hardworking, working-class man and woman's pocket to take tax pocket and give it to friends of the elites to build these stupid carbon sequestration schemes.
So, because I'm trying to wrap my head around this concept, right? So you have this machine that obviously it uses power, it uses electricity to operate in order to sequester carbon from air that it's pumping through, so that you can reduce the amount of carbon, but you're burning something on the other end to do it. It's just this self-perpetuating heat generation unit.
Oh yeah.
All you'd have to do is plant some gardens. Like literally all you have to do is plant food and it gets rid of the carbon at a better rate, and you have your byproduct is food.
Right, but you can't do that. And look at Alberta. Like, one of the largest growing sectors of the Alberta power grid right now isn't solar, and it isn't wind power. But as far as GUILBEAULT is concerned, this is green energy. Okay, like, this is, which just cracks me up. And what I'm talking about specifically is biomass fuel. Okay, so in Alberta, the companies that formerly were cutting down our forests to make pulp and paper, right? Because nobody's buying newspapers anymore. They need to figure out what the hell they're doing with all these timber leases they got.
Oh, right? That's what it's a retrofit. That's what it is.
Now they're mowing down forests and feeding them into tree crematoriums, right? On an industrial scale, right? To generate electricity by burning trees. But I mean, anybody that's studied this stuff, right, knows that, that if you burn an aspen tree or a poplar tree as a fuel, right, it's 3, 4, 5 times less efficient than all the great coal that we have in Alberta, right? You have to burn 3, 4 times more of it to generate the same amount of electricity. And of course, if you're burning 3 or 4 times more of it, you're generating 3 or 4 times more carbon, right? Yeah. And I mean, that's why, like, literally in Germany, they were burning the equivalent of the Black Forest every year to feed these, only the Germans could come up with the tree crematorium, right? To feed these tree crematoriums, right? And, they're moving away from it. England is moving away from all of their tree crematoriums and are converting them back to coal for the very reasons that I'm talking about. They're not ecologically sustainable, and I'm telling you, and I was sitting next to a guy on a plane. This would be 20 some odd years ago. We were, sitting in business class having a chat, and I was asking the guy out of curiosity what he did for a living. Oh, well, I'm a process engineer. And I said, oh, isn't that interesting? I said, who do you work for? Oh, I work in the in the area of biomass. Blah 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 blah. I said, biomass. Oh yes, blah blah. I said, like, you mean like you cut down living trees and you stick them in an oven and you make electricity and pretend that it's environmentally friendly? Oh, well, it is environmentally friendly. We're carbon negative, he said. I said, carbon negative?
My ass.
I said, I'm not a chemist or a physicist or whatever. But from what I remember from, high school chemistry, I said, if you burn anything, you're creating CO2. And I said, certainly if you burn wood, you're getting CO2 in the same way if you burned a lump of coal or whatever. So can you please tell me how it is that you're carbon negative? Oh, he said, we get a carbon credit for all the years that tree was alive and absorbing CO2 and emitting oxygen. We get a carbon credit. So that makes this carbon negative. So that idiot GUILBEAUT, I refer to him as the gibbering GUILBEAUT, right? Supports tree crematoriums in Canada on the theory that they're carbon negative because they should be getting a credit for all of the good that tree did when it was still allowed to live and breathe and be part of the ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
But think about it. Once you cut that sucker down, it's no longer part of the ecosystem. It's just another corpse being loaded into the crematorium, right? To make allegedly carbon friendly electricity, right, at the expense of our environment. And and maybe if you subscribe to what you and I were saying, well, maybe all these trees should be cut down and we should just replace them all with grass, and maybe we should have more golf courses because grass absorbs more, more.
Or grow more trees because you can build houses with trees. Yeah! It's a good thing.
But I mean, you honestly can't make this stuff up. I mean, this is how stupid all of these people are, and they want us to believe that they're environmentalists. Well, I mean, it's completely insane.
That actually brings up a really good point, because I even made a shirt for my store, and I don't know why it's not. Oh, there it is. This is a shirt that I put on my store. It's ecological, not environmental. It's the emphasis on the logical and not mental. This is the whole point of this concept here is largely what you're getting into, especially in your article here. And for everybody in the chat here tonight, I'm gonna put the link in the chat so you guys can check out the Substack, because these articles are fantastic. I love your nicknaming and just your style of writing. The gibbering GUILBEAUT is hilarious, but it's not logical. at the end of the day, it's not logical, and it doesn't come from a place of making any sense. Even the premise that they provide you in the first place, their solutions don't even address the premise, like this carbon credits crap with the biomass. It's just less efficiency for the sake of political will. Like this is all this is. I think people are genuinely primed for a new environmental movement of people who are industry leaders that are coming forward and saying, look, we can clean up the environment, and we can produce a lot of energy, and we can do it in the best way, and we can be the shining beacon in the world to say, hey, look at Canada. We're getting the logs out of the forest, and we're doing it safely and cleanly. Look, we're pulling the hydrocarbons out of the ground. We're doing it cleanly and safely, and we're the best place to do it. Buy our stuff. That's what we should be doing.
Well, that's what the Alberta oil industry has been doing. But every time we turn around, Trudeau and GUILBEAULT are basically telling us we need to shut down the provincial economy of Alberta, by 2035. I mean, one of my Substacks that I wrote recently, you get a laugh out of, I was writing about, GUILBEAULT and Trudeau's fixation on electric vehicles, and the fact that, by 2035, we're not going to be allowed to buy internal combustion engine vehicles anymore. And I don't know whether you guys noticed this in BC or not, but about, I don't know, it was 4 or 5 weeks ago, we had a really nasty cold snap run through Alberta. And like on my deck at the ranch, it was actually colder than it was in Antarctica. Like it was literally 40, like minus 42. This is without wind chill, minus 42 Celsius or 46 below Fahrenheit. Like It was chilly, right? And of course, I said, like, I've got a new definition for Schadenfreude in Alberta. And for your viewers that don't know what Schadenfreude is, it's a word that only the Germans could come up with. It means to laugh gleefully at the misfortune of others.
That's right. That's right.
So I said I have a new definition of Schadenfreude in Alberta, and that is laughing hysterically at some dumbass liberal stuck by the side of the road with his frozen Tesla minus 42 Celsius, right? And of course, that same the Teslas were freezing all over Alberta, right? We had these alerts that were flashing on our phones telling us that we needed to run around and start shutting off lights and all this other stuff, or we were going to have a massive power outage and people were going to freeze to death in the middle of a minus 42 degree Alberta winter. So the interesting thing about that is apparently the Alberta power grid in total only produces 12,500 megawatts of electricity, and that's peak emergency power. The average, maximum output of our power grid is around 12,000 megawatts, right? So interestingly, okay, if you were to convert, we have 4 million light trucks and cars that are registered in Alberta as part of, that are on the roads according to Alberta registries, right? So if you were to only take 20% of those vehicles, right, and forcibly converted them to electric, right, and then say not even all of them, not 100%, but just 20% of those vehicles were electric, and if you put a million electric vehicles on the road in Alberta, each one takes 1,200 kilowatts to charge. Multiply that by a million, you're at 12,000 megawatts. So just to get 20% of our vehicles electric in Alberta, we would require the entire Alberta power grid, leaving no power for anything else, right? So, and if we wanted to actually meet the GUILBEAULT target by 2035 of 100% electric vehicles, we would need to quintuple the output of the Alberta power grid. I don't even know how many tens of billions or hundreds of billions of dollars that would cost. But again, that's the problem with GUILBEAUT and Trudeau. They live, in this fantasy world. And I think, Daniel Smith, I think, rightly described it as magical thinking, right? Yes. Trudeau, in my latest Substack, I described, Trudeau of having studied drama school economics, right, as opposed to real economics.
I read that. That's hilarious.
But they live in this world of, magical thinking, drama school economics, drama school, physics and, law of conservation of energy and all the rest of it. They all must think that there's some magic power plug in the sky that you can just magically plug into, and it supplies all of their electric needs for all of this so-called green, energy crap that they want to stuff down people's throats. They have no idea as to what the requirements are for a functioning power grid, what it takes to keep people alive in a minus 42-degree climate, right? Mm-hmm. So they must, I guess Trudeau gets to spend enough time on Aga Khan's island that he, forgets that we actually live in one of the coldest planets on Earth.
One of the coldest, countries.
And, and that must be why he's flooding our country with all of these people from, sub-Saharan Africa and, equatorial South and Central America, et cetera. Taking them from places that are really warm where they don't need to be heated to survive to places where they need to live inside and crank the thermostat up to 80 degrees to keep from freezing to death in the winter. Like, one of the most carbon intensive thing that Trudeau is doing right now is his immigration policies, letting 2 million people a year into Canada. That's why we can't meet our carbon targets. We allegedly live in this world where AI is going to solve all of our problems and it's going to create massive unemployment, but we're bringing people into Canada by the millions every year. Like, how are we going to support all of these people?
We can't. We can't do it on so many levels. Like, it's not just the environmental thing, not just the power supply, but we can't afford it. You just can't afford it. There's no place to house these people. And I feel really sorry for the people that are coming, because they're coming on false premises, right? That there's room for them, that they're going to be able to make a life. Then we're in a hole. We're in a trap, a population trap right now.
I have friends that live, lots of friends that live in rural Alberta, right? And they're telling, one of my friends lives in a small town in Alberta, and he says, Jeff, like, it's insane. He says, like, because he said, like, we have a Walmart now, we have a Costco, we got some box stores and all the rest of it. He says they're all full. So he said all of those businesses are now fully staffed and fully employed. Yet he said every time I drive into downtown Olds, Alberta, he said I'm seeing all of these people who are obviously visible minorities or new immigrants wandering around the streets of downtown Olds, Alberta, going like, how the hell did I get here?
Right?
Right? No jobs for them. There's nothing for them to do. And they're wandering around going like, holy crap, what happened to my life? Right? Like, no wonder so many of them want to go home.
Well, it was crazy. A friend of mine just today, he sent me a message saying he went to Vancouver, because I don't live very far from Vancouver, and he works down there occasionally. And he said he drove by this giant crowd of obviously looked like they weren't from here, new immigrants, this giant crowd, and they were all lining up, and he looked around and he saw a sign for a job fair. And he looked around, he looked around online. He didn't say anything about job fairs, and he couldn't figure out where it was even being advertised for this job fair. And there was just too many people to fill. I mean, they have to, the amount of businesses that would have to be hiring for that to fill those positions. I feel like they got slim pickings for anything.
Oh, it's absolutely insane. I was reading another study recently, and this goes back like 12 or 13 years, and I'm sure that the number is, a lot higher now. But they were estimating that the cost to Canada, 12 years ago for all the immigrants that we were bringing in, when you look at what they contribute to the economy versus what they take out, right, was something like 23 or 24 billion dollars a year, right? And of course, it's
are you talking about money that they're expatriating back to their home countries?
No. I'm talking about, like, you bring all these people over here, they don't have jobs, they're not able to work, because we basically thrown out Canada's whole, former immigration system, where, effectively you had points and people couldn't get into the country unless they, basically had a job lined up and waiting for them.
And that system was great. It worked, and it was fair, and people came in and became Canadian.
It worked really well. We weren't welcoming people with open arms that didn't have either English or French as their first language, so that, they don't get here and then before they can get a job, they actually have to learn to speak one of our official languages, right?
Right.
It's and now it's, like, you've got Rachel Notley going into Northeast Calgary and promising, Eritreans, single language Eritrean education, and they're going to create a new Alberta curriculum so that these people can continue to live in, in an African language ghetto and not integrate with the rest of society. and that's going to be paid for by the rest of Alberta taxpayers. That was one of Rachel Notley's campaign promises.
Well, I remember this was in the news a number of months ago. The Eritreans in I don't know if I'm pronouncing that even correctly, but I didn't even know it was a thing. I didn't even know that. Like I had to learn what Eritrea was when this occurred. But I believe it was in Calgary or in Edmonton or somewhere.
Yeah, it was in Falconridge, northeast Calgary. And I guess you had two different factions. There's a civil war going on in Eritrea, and you had a group on one side of, the rebel faction, right, and then the government faction, and about 300 of them went at one another with sticks. And I said, well, the only real blessing there was that when they came to Canada, they couldn't bring their AK-47s.
Oh, right? Wow. Like, okay, fair enough.
No, I mean, it's, it was a real mess.
But like,
right? And it is a real mess.
And well, here's the thing: like, I'm happy to bring people in that want to get away from some conflict, but if they want to bring that conflict here, that's kind of redundant. We're not looking for that. Why would we allow that?
Well, I'm a first generation immigrant. My father came over, his family came over between the First and Second World Wars. And I guess, in all fairness, my father's first language was German. It wasn't English. But, they came over, with money from a business. They started a bakery, all those types of things. They had skills that they immediately put to work, in the country. Up to recently, that's always been the way our immigration system works.
You mean he didn't declare war on the English Canadians?
What's that?
He didn't declare war on the English Canadians, take over the Polish neighborhood, do all that?
No. My father's family came over here to avoid all that stuff.
Well, of course, that's what I'm getting at. Like, the whole point of coming here is to get away from these conflicts, not bring the conflicts with you. That's kind of what's redundant. It's unwelcome. Like, I don't want to have wars in our streets.
Well, and honestly, I think that should be grounds for deportation, right? I mean, it's like, if you're here, I don't care whether you're Irish, German, whatever your nationality is. If you're here raising money, to support terrorism, like Canada is one of the largest, terrorist fundraising states in the world, right? It's well known to our security services that, Fort McMurray is one of the largest sources of terrorist funding in the world. So you've got all these people from these conflict regions that are making huge money in Fort McMurray and are sending it back to, support ISIS-K or support, all these various terrorist groups in the Middle East. And it's just, it's just extremely well known. And our government does nothing about it. I mean, like, as far as I'm concerned, if you're raising money for terrorists and you're raising money to support conflicts overseas, right? You're generally making the world a less safe place. You're making the world a much less safe place for, your fellow Canadians to travel, right? And as far as I'm concerned, that should be grounds for deportation. If anybody's caught raising money for any of these groups, whether it's the Iranian Revolutionary Guard or I guess with Chinese communist money, it goes the other way. They bring money into Canada and then give it to Trudeau. But as far as
could that be kind of a dangerous one to legislate, though? Because I'd see it as like, well, it depends on what the regime at the moment says. So say, for example, you had a Chinese communist sympathizing government in Canada, and they wanted to deport people from Hong Kong that are trying to raise money to spread freedom in Hong Kong or even Taiwan or something like that.
Yeah, but even then, I don't think it's that difficult to line. I mean, the simple fact of the matter is, I don't care what your excuse is. If you're in Canada, you're a Canadian. Your money needs to stay in Canada, and you shouldn't be supporting, any conflict overseas. If the Canadian government, as a matter of policy, wants to support freedom in Hong Kong, that's for the government to do. It's not for individuals, to be raising money and creating problems elsewhere, right?
And that's an interesting take on that.
If you have to draw a line somewhere, I don't think it's a very difficult line to draw.
It's an interesting thing. So, because our government's kind of getting into the ballpark of jumping over what their traditional role was for, like, property rights, things like that. We saw these new measures in British Columbia is, what is it? They call it unexplained wealth measures. and they're trying to bring this in here in British Columbia. So if you have things and they feel suspicious that you got it through some ill-gotten whatever sort of thing, they can ask you to produce evidence that you obtained ownership of something. It puts the cart before the horse. Essentially,
but again, that's what we've been watching through the pandemic, is just this ongoing encroachment of government into people's personal liberty. I mean, government, and I actually, this is probably 6 or 7 months ago now. I sat down with my daughter and I said, honey, I said, she was 12 at the time, and I said, your mom and I almost feel like we owe you an apology. Like, just 12 years ago, our country was not like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
I said, by and large, I said, when you were born, it didn't matter if it was a liberal government or a conservative government. Canadians had faith that, that they followed some basic principles. Like, one, they're going to try to keep taxes as low as possible. Two, they're going to try to keep the national debt as low as possible so that we're not wasting tax dollars on interest payments. And three, by and large, the role of Canadian government was as much as possible to stay the hell out of citizens' lives and not irritate them on an ongoing basis with a bunch of petty bullshit, right?
Yeah.
And now all that's out the window. Basic economics don't matter anymore. We basically live in the world of the Weimar Republic, where they can just print as much money as they want, borrow as much money as they want, until it's going to cost $1 million for a loaf of bread. We're heading there.
Well,
right?
And that's the thing. They say that if you forget history, you're bound to repeat it. Most people don't remember the lessons of Weimar Republic and how they owed a huge debt to the rest of Europe because of the First World War, and they decided to just monetize it, print the money, and pay the debts off, and it destroyed their currencies.
Well, that's and again, it's like that Chat GPT nonsense that you were talking about earlier, where they're now generating images of a black George Washington, right? Well, okay, but I mean, I think that's fundamentally dangerous, because it's like, okay, well, let's forget all about the fact that George Washington was a white slave owner. I mean, let's not address that part of history anymore. He was a black man, so obviously everything was okay. We don't have to worry about No, seriously, we don't need to worry about that ugly history anymore, because everybody in positions of power and authority were black. So all this crap that we've been hearing about slavery and how bad racism was in the United States and all the rest of it, how could it have been that bad if all the founding fathers were black?
Oh, that's funny.
But I don't think these people have really thought about the lessons that they're teaching, and how they're basically rewriting history is going to prevent an entire generation of kids from confronting the more difficult aspects of our history that need to be confronted.
Well, and
right?
that's actually, because if you tie it into Canadian history, the interesting part that I find is, well, for one, we were the end of the Underground Railroad. For one, this was where people went for freedom. So that should be a point of pride. Canadians have always
after 1835, right? I think that's when the United Kingdom outlawed slavery. We had slavery in Canada. It's not talked about, but I mean, you could own slaves in Canada up until 1835.
I thought before Canada had founded and became a nation, they outlawed it.
Well, no, but that was after Canada didn't become a nation until after the Civil War and after the United Kingdom outlawed slavery.
Right. So, when we were a colony, there was slavery, but our entire nation's history, there's been no slavery, technically.
Well, yeah, Canada's history, but I mean, certainly on the continent of Upper Canada, Lower Canada, et cetera, mm-hmm. There were slave owners, and slavery was part of our history.
Well, the other part of it too is we ended slavery. Like this is something that doesn't get talked about enough when people bring up the how bad slavery was as an institution, or is still, because it still exists in the world. This is the thing.
Well, no,
we ended it.
What do you think 15-minute cities are? I mean, it's neo-feudalism. It's a new form of slavery. You're taking working men and women, right, working class men and women, and you're locking them in these ghettos where everything that they do is monitored by cameras. They're told they're going to be told when they can leave their neighborhoods, how they can leave their neighborhoods, where they can work. There's going to be all kinds of economic disincentives for them, to do anything else, own their own vehicles, be able to travel 30 miles, commute 30 miles back and forth for a better job, all of that kind of stuff. I mean, we're heading back to it. I mean, we basically are living in an authoritarian state now, right? And, every time you turn around, there's, some form of government control, government, camera, something, controlling every aspect of your life.
How long can they hold on to it though? So say for example, they pulled it off. They got their 15-minute cities. Neo-feudalism becomes a thing. But just like the Soviet Union, they accomplished what they were going for. But how long did it last? It inevitably will fail.
Like, so because this is at its core, it's socialism, right? It's always bound to fail because it doesn't follow the fundamental laws of economics. In the same way that the Soviet Union collapsed. If Canada keeps going down the road that we're going down, Canada is going to become Venezuela. Right, and we're gonna have crime in the streets. All of these, all of these, immigrants that are being brought into the country, will be roaming around in gangs. I mean, on and on and on and on. Crime through the roof. We're already seeing that in our cities. I mean, our cities are becoming unlivable hellholes. You've been to Hastings Street in Vancouver, downtown Calgary. You've got all these people that are all hunched over, because of the damage they've done to themselves on Trank and these other street drugs that are, literally destroyed their spinal cords. I mean, it's disgusting what our country is becoming under the so-called leadership of all these 15-minute city fanatics.
It's insane.
It completely is. And I mean, I really grieve for, my country, and I grieve for, what's happened, just in the last 8 years under Trudeau. Like they have done so much damage to this country that it's a real question as to how many decades it's going to take for us to recover from it. And I think if he gets reelected, we have no hope.
If Trudeau gets reelected,
if Bill Gates and Guilbeault have their way, I mean, hell, we could be in the middle of a new ice age in 20 years.
What a stupid idea! What a dumb idea!
I know they want to block out the sun. No, I mean, it's like, no, it's, apparently it's too warm in Canada, so we better turn down the thermostat because, Canadians obviously are too warm.
This crazy circular logic that they keep going through, though, because you just described earlier that they're gonna sequester carbon by running machines that generate carbon to power machines that take the carbon away, and then we're gonna block out the sun. And then have solar panels everywhere. Like, what is
no. The solar panels aren't going to work. So the gibbering Guilbeault wants to block out the sun so that we'll have to burn more oil and gas and coal to keep warm.
It's stupid.
I mean, that's how crazy all this stuff is, right? But I mean, I think when it comes right down to it, and we have no idea what effect that's going to have on agriculture. Like, if you shorten the Canadian growing season by a month or two, are we even going to be able to produce food anymore? I mean, if Bill Gates had his way, I mean, he said he wants to reduce global population by 50%. I mean, he's basically a modern Malthusian, and it's not just enough to have these theories. Gates wants to bring this stuff to fruition, and apparently, apparently people aren't dying fast enough for him. So now he wants to block out the sun because that'll do the trick.
Yeah, for people who don't know who Malthus, I think his name was John Malthus. He was a mathematician, came up with a terrible theory that overpopulation was going to ruin the world. It never came true, by the way. It never came true, but there's still followers, a lot of them in the elite camps, that believe his thoughts that the world population is a detrimental thing. The other side of the coin is there's plenty of room for more people. That's at the end of the day where it is.
No, that's it. I mean, in Canada, I mean, Canadians aren't breeding at a replacement rate because nobody can afford to have kids.
That's it. Yeah.
That's the simple fact of the matter. I mean, people's heating bills are now $700, $800, $900 a month. Thanks to Trudeau's carbon tax. And it's not reducing the amount of carbon because people need heat to live in Canada. I mean, it's one of the most basic, it's one of the most basic human needs, and they're taxing it. I mean, Trudeau and Guilbeault might just as well be taxing the air that we breathe as to tax heat in Canada, which is what they're doing.
Well, they are. Their carbon tax is taxing the air.
No, that's well, no, but what they're actually taxing is our ability to keep warm and our ability to work and our ability to go to work and all of those things that you need for a healthy and vibrant economy. They want to destroy. I mean, getting back to what we were talking about earlier about that whole environmental movement just being a front for communists. I had a friend from Poland, and he said, we did this in Poland 20 years ago. He said, we always referred to all of these climate change people as watermelons. And I said, watermelons? He said, oh yeah. He says, green on the outside, red on the inside.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
They're all communists at heart. And I mean, if you look at the policies that Trudeau's pursuing, name one policy that doesn't benefit communist China.
Yeah, none of them do. None of them benefit us. Like none of them benefit us. Sorry, that's what I was trying to say.
I would argue that every single policy that Trudeau's enacting in and around climate is to the benefit of China and the detriment of Canadians.
Well, absolutely. And here's the thing. So while we're trying to reduce our CO2 and we outlawed using coal for energy, we increased in the time that Trudeau has been in government, we've increased our exports to China by 300%. More coal goes to China than when he became prime minister. I thought this is a global issue. It's global warming. It's climate change.
No. It's only an existential threat in Canada to Canadians. I mean, there's you got this they live in this fantasy world that they've even sold to the Supreme Court just by going, existential threat, we're all going to die, right? It's all this Chicken Little, I call it Chicken Littleism, right? But right, the sky is falling. And I mean, it's this nonsense that somehow or other that anything we do in Canada is going to impact global carbon, right? It's not. The simple fact of the matter is it's not. We could completely shut down every single bit of carbon that we emit tomorrow. We'd all die, of course, right? Mm-hmm. Of poverty, starvation, freezing to death, all that, right? Leaving all of that aside, even if we did that, even if we killed ourselves at the altar of climate change, right?
Yeah.
It would make one bit of difference to global carbon because India and China would just continue to emit to their heart's content at our expense. And I'm sure China would go, isn't this nice? There's this big empty, country where everybody there, collectively committed climate suicide. So we can now move in and take over all the natural resources and continue burning coal and, natural gas and the rest of it. Boy, weren't those Canadian people stupid, right?
Pretty much.
Of the proverbial lemmings jumping over the cliff. And isn't it nice that they left us this big empty country that we can now extract all the resources from because it was foolish to not do it in the first place?
Essentially. It's always been my theory that if we ever got communism, they got their way, then we would forget about all of this stuff and get right to work. Like they would start utilizing the resources that we have immediately.
I mean, look at the growth of the public sector under Trudeau, right? It's like, we're not creating jobs in the private sector, right? And let's keep them, so we have children under 18 who aren't really part of the workforce. We have an aging population on the other hand. So basically, we take away at least a third of our population, as being not of working age, right? And then of the population in the middle, we're almost pushing a third of Canadians are now employed by some level of government, municipal, federal, or provincial. A third, right? So they claim, bureaucrats claim they pay taxes, but let's look at it from a logical perspective or economic.
Yeah,
perspective.
They're not paying anything.
The government gets the money that they then give back to the government, right? So who's really supporting the whole show? It's that 30% that's left that actually work in private industry or the private sector that create stuff, create real jobs, pay real taxes, because taxes paid by bureaucrats aren't real taxes. No. It's just them the government its money back, right? So there's literally, less than a third of Canadians are supporting 2/3 of the country. And every year Trudeau increases the burden by 2 million, bringing in, immigrants that are quite happy to have that third of working Canadians support them as well.
Yeah, right.
So the question is when do all of us simply get crushed to death, under carrying the weight of, 2/3 of the country.
At some point, it's gonna come home to roost, and we're just not gonna be able to pay it anymore. That's the crazy part about it. Listen, you were worried we wouldn't have enough stuff for an hour, and we've gone over. I told you it would happen, because that's what happens in these chats.
I really enjoy talking to you. It's a lot of fun.
It's a lot of fun. It really is. And I want to bring you back, because everybody in the chat is freaking out. This is like the best chat ever. This is so much truth being told right now. You don't hear enough of this out there. I want to address a couple of super chats that people gave during our chat here. G Meister for $5 says, didn't Hinshaw get $250,000 bonus? Why is she allowed to keep that? That's, yeah, right. She'll keep it, and she won't have to pay that back. Peter Witten with a $2 super chat says, you had me at upright Baldwin in the back, Clyde. I don't know what the reference is there. Light Giver for $10 says 80 vaccinated doctors said, I can't actually say that on YouTube. Message loud and clear. I heard you. Thanks for the super chat. Steve's Hyde with a $2 super chat. Snowpiercer in real life. I've seen that movie. It's a bad movie, but it's a real situation that could happen. Robert McFallon for $10 says, holy crap, this is your new best guest ever, spitting so much truth. Why is he not running for office? Probably because you probably don't want to run for government. Forget that.
I have too much other stuff on the go. I'm still looking forward to getting a $10 billion judgment against the government of Alberta for crushing every business in this province during the pandemic.
Well, I just hope they settle, because then it won't drag on for 10 years.
I'm hopeful that they will. And certainly I think Daniel, everybody that's from Alberta that's listening, reach out to your MLAs and reach out to Premier Smith, because they do listen, and tell them that it's, that the government of Alberta needs to settle the business class action lawsuit, because it's completely despicable that the province of Alberta should think that small business people should carry the weight of of all of the pandemic restrictions on their shoulders economically, which were ostensibly for the benefit of society as a whole. So, and from a fairness.
And if you're a business owner and you want to be a part of this class action, the link is in the chat. I'm going to make sure it's in the description when we republish this video as well. But you can fill this out, and you can become part of this class action lawsuit. It's very, very important that you do.
Yeah, and just to be clear, the way class actions work in Alberta, everybody's deemed to be in unless you opt out. But for any business people in Alberta that suffered economic losses during the pandemic and all the phony public health restrictions, illegal public health restrictions that came in, fill out the form on our website, because we're trying to get a handle on the scope of the losses in the province. I mean, we're right now we're literally pushing $1 billion worth of losses that we're looking at just at this early stage in the process. So the more people that provide us their information and provide and let us know what their losses were, the stronger we're going to be driving this forward. So please take a look at that, and please consider providing us your information.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your work you're doing for this. Peter Witten with a $5 super chat says, let's go Clyde. Let's get Clyde some more revenue here, folks. Even if it's only a couple of bucks, he's the real deal. Well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. Thank you. I also got Robert McFallon for $10 says, it's not about the environment. The Third World War started in 2019. The UN is the enemy of humanity. That's a bold statement. It's true. Robert McFallon also saying for $10, and Hogan, I think you meant Horgan, the destroyer, is on the board of directors at a coal company. Yeah, that's the thing. So they've been increasing the coal going out to China, and our old premier, John Horgan, he had his hands in that one, and he's definitely not suffering because of it. That's the reality of the situation. It's just cronyism, it's corruption, it's gross, it's greasy, and this is the world we live in right now. But the best part about this is that people like yourself are coming out, speaking out boldly about it. People are talking about this. People are becoming more open to speak about these things. And this is how things change. Light Giver, just jumping in with another super chat for $20, says, look up congressional records, January 10th, 1963, A34 and A35. this is a copy of the Communist Handbook. You'll be shocked to see how much has taken place. I'm not aware of this. I don't know.
It wouldn't surprise me one bit that isn't an accurate statement. I mean, look, Guilbeault is so proud of his social, the fact that he's a socialist. He has no problem admitting to it publicly. I mean, they're destroying Canada as we know it, and we all need to rise up and stop it.
Yes.
And enough, right? And I mean, like, if people aren't terrified about the fact that Guilbeault literally wants to put pollution into the atmosphere, to cool the planet down. This guy can barely ride a bicycle, but we're going to let him decide, how we're going to moderate the temperature for the entire planet and all of humanity and all life on the planet. Like, it's complete insanity. And, people need to be rising up and telling our governments that this kind of foolishness will not be tolerated.
That's right. And I'm encouraged.
At that point, they're trying to kill us all.
Well, yeah, indirectly. And that's the thing. Like, some of them, I think, believe this stuff. I think Guilbeault actually believes the crap that he says. A lot of the other ones, like the Al Gores and the John Kerrys, I think they just know it's just it's a way to make a check. That's their thing, right?
No, I think John Kerry. I think his wife is largely divested of all of her Heinz money. But I think it's less than coincidental that John Kerry has really, really big. Connections to the processed food industry that would all profit handsomely from being able to add bug paste to everything that they do.
Yeah.
Right? So,
and waterfront property. I always say that you don't listen to what people say. Listen to what people do. It paints a way better picture. If they all have waterfront property and they're talking about oceans rising.
Yeah, I can't remember who it was that said it, but I thought it was great. There was whether it was a merchant banker or whoever it was, but was saying there isn't a single insurance company or bank in the world that's currently refusing mortgages on 25 and 30-year mortgages on oceanfront property, right?
That would be a really bad investment if you actually believe that stuff was going to happen.
All of our financial institutions still have trillions of dollars in loans outstanding on oceanfront property, so I think it's a pretty good bet still.
All right, Jeff, so stick on the line here. I'm just going to end the stream real quick. I just want to thank everybody for coming out and joining in this chat. It was really eye-opening. A lot of great stuff. Go check out the Substack. We'll make sure that the link's in the description below, as well as the link to the presser for the lawsuit that's taking place. And of course, all those links will be in the description down below. Thank you so much, Jeff, for joining tonight and and speaking with us.
Yeah, just a quick plug on the Substack. It's Conspiracy Facts with Jeffrey Rath. And it's free. I'm not trying to make money on it. I actually just started doing this for my buddies and friends of mine that think the same way that I do, and we all get a good laugh out of it every week. So if anybody finds found this stream tonight to be the least bit entertaining, check out my Substack. You'll probably find it pretty funny. So anyway, have a good night, and thank you for having me on.
Beautiful. Everybody, we'll see you Monday morning.